Enjoying today's sessions dedicated to perception and mental health. This pandemic and its imposed isolation has brought to light the importance of focusing on our mental health as professionals and educators, but also as siblings, parents, partners, spouses, lovers, and friends. Here to speak more on that topic of mental health is our honored guest, Dr. Peter Dewitt. Peter Dewitt is a former teacher of 11 years and principal of 8 years who facilitates workshops and provides keynotes nationally and internationally, focusing on leadership, coaching, and fostering inclusive school climates. Peter's work has been adopted at the university, state level, and national level, and he works with numerous districts, ministries of education, school boards, regional and state organizations, where he trains leadership teams and coaches building leaders. Peter is the author of several books, including Collaborative Leadership, 6 Influences That Matter Most, School Climate, Leading with Collective Efficacy, Coach It Further, Using the Art of Coaching to Improve School Leadership, and Instructional Leadership, Creating Practice Out of Theory. His articles have appeared in education journals at the state, national, and international level, and he has presented at forums, conferences, and panel discussions at the state, national, and international conference level. Some of his highlights have been to present for the National Association of Elementary School Principals, ASCD, and NBC's Education Nation. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Peter Dewitt. Let's throw some El Paso love in the chat, maybe some emojis.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Crystal. And everybody can call me Peter, by the way, so we can be a little bit less formal, but thank you for joining me. I'm actually joining you from upstate New York, so I live in Albany, New York. And this is a very, very important topic, and it's something that I've been focusing on for a while, but honestly, over the past 6 months, I've been asked to talk about it a lot. Now, you're going to notice that up on the screen, this might look a little bit different, and it's because at the top you see www.menti.com. What I'm asking for you today, and I know we don't have a long time together, but I really do want to hear from you. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing things in the chat box, which I'm always going to keep my eye on, what I'd love for you to be able to do is actually join me on Mentimeter. Now, this is just for us. It's all anonymous. They don't take your email address or anything like that. But if you sign up on an extra tab or on your phone to menti.com and you use our code, which is just our code for this time, 7102-8709, it's a way that you're going to be able to engage with me, because I am going to ask you some open-ended questions, and I really do want to hear from you, because I want this to be as much of engaging in dialogue as possible for us. So I can see that a few of you are signing up. So as you open up that extra tab, or you get on your phone and you go to menti.com and you use that code that's up there, 7102-8709. I want to talk a little bit about how the presentation is going to go. Now, don't worry, when I switch screens, you are still going to see that address and that number up at the top. So please feel free to join whenever you feel comfortable. But we're going to engage in the following ways. We're going to do it through a chat box. Like I said, if you want to engage with me that way, that's fine. Or Mentimeter, which is actually what's up on the screen. So what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about what this is going to focus on today. It's really going to be focusing on statistics, science, and strategies. Now, here's the thing. I bet you every single one of you that is joining me right now at this presentation already knows strategies that you would like to engage in to help you with mental health and well-being from a teacher or a principal perspective. I think we all understand the strategies that we need for self-care, although we are going to talk about a few of those. What I think our biggest issue is that we're not consistent in that practice. And part of it is letting ourselves off the hook to be able to give ourselves permission to actually engage in some of those strategies. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, but I'm also going to give you some extra things to be able to look at, because the statistics right now and the science behind it are really showing that we are moving on this fast speeding train, and we really need to be able to figure out how to turn it around and alleviate some of the stress that we're feeling. This, for me, I remember as a school principal, we actually saw an issue with our students. We were in I taught in high poverty city schools, but I was a principal in a rural suburban school district. And one of the things that we started to notice in 2006, 2007, is that students were coming to us feeling very anxious. And I know that you certainly see the same thing now in 2021. But we started to do a program, a mindfulness program with our students back then. Now, over the past few years, I've actually been a consistent practitioner of meditation, and mindfulness is something I've written about for finding common ground quite a bit. But it wasn't until last October or last August, I should say, that I was working with school leadership teams that I've been working with for a couple of years, and they're based in California. I'm coaching them remotely here in upstate New York. And one of my strongest teams I met up with, and it was August, so school had started 2 weeks prior. And when I was talking to the group, it was probably the first 15 or 20 minutes, but two of the members started crying in our coaching session. That was not something that typically happened. California at the time, they were dealing with wildfires. The school district that I'm working in has a very high poverty rate, a high ELL rate, and they have not really had a vacation since the summer of 2019, because we know when the school year of 2019-2020 hit, in March of 2020 hit, COVID came into our lives. So what I couldn't get that meeting off my mind. And the next morning I woke up at about 5 a.m. and I wrote this blog called "We Should Be Concerned About the Mental Health of Principals." It is not that I'm not concerned about teachers, but there was a lot out there about teachers and students, and there was virtually nothing about principals. And I wrote a blog within a half an hour to 45 minutes, and I posted it. And it was shared 13,000 times on Facebook within 2 days. That shows the magnitude of this issue. Now, over time, I started to explore this to a much deeper level, looking at principals and teachers. I run a web show for Education Week called A Seat at the Table. And one of the web shows that we focused on was mental health and well-being. And I had Mark Brackett, Mark Greenberg, and Sharif El-Maki as my guests to talk about what this can look like. This is a topic that people are increasingly finding to be more important. And like I said at the beginning, it's not that we don't know what to do, it's that we don't always practice it consistently. So let's get Mentimeter going. And maybe this is a good opportunity for those of you who didn't engage with menti.com yet to start doing it. But what I'd like is just a ranking. I have felt an increase in stress since the pandemic started. I know that some of you are going to say this is no brainer. Of course we did, but not always true. I've actually done this survey with school principals and teachers over the past year. And some people actually said, no, they haven't felt an increase in stress. And in fact, a couple of people here. I love that 25 of you are signed up so far. So let's see how many more we can go. I'll give about 10 seconds for you to finish this up. I felt an increase in stress since the pandemic started. My question is going to be, what are you doing about it? What are we doing? Are we taking things off our plate? Are we trying to disconnect from social media? What are we doing about it? That's going to be important. So thank you for those of you that have filled this out. The following is a reason I have felt an increase in stress since the pandemic began. 30 seconds. Why don't you give me a reason. What is it that is the reason behind your stress and anxiety? Job insecurity. Thank you for putting that. What else? There must be some other reasons. Uncertainty. Yep. We are, many times in education, control freaks. And a lot of this has been so out of our control that it's very hard for us to be able to deal with this. Responsibility for others' safety. Absolutely. Go back to the workplace. Workloads have tripled. Absolutely. That's part of this issue, workload. Worrying about the home lives of my students, something that I venture to guess you did before COVID as well, but it's increased and deepened since this time? Overworking, fear of COVID-19, balance with work and personal. Absolutely. As you join me on a Saturday, right? I am a short order cook, online school tutor, counselor, and cheerleader for all my family and friends. And then I get to do my job. Yeah. 24 hours of work, 24-hour schedule, getting sick, shortcoming of household materials. Okay. Kids at home while I work, the noise. Yeah, that is for sure. The pressure from admin. Yep. I think it's really good. And some of you wrote the unknown. So I'll give about maybe 10 seconds for you to finish this. I see more of you are signing up on Mentimeter, which I deeply appreciate that you would actually do that. So give 10-year binder. Yes. It's hard, right? Because we're talking about tenure, we're talking about observations, we're talking about the fact that a lot of states are still feeling the pressure to do state assessment. California, where I do a lot of coaching, they've been doing remote learning since last March, and they're still responsible for assessments. So there are all those pieces. Thank you for adding to the list. Now, let me give you the statistics of what was happening prior to COVID. There are increasing demands of the job. So for those of you that wrote your job duties have increased, you have research now to back that up. And this is not always a healthy thing. The Center for Creative Leadership, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, have found that there has been an increase in demands for school principals over the past 15 years. And remember, all of these studies from the national and international organizations are prior to COVID. A couple of other staggering statistics. This from the Australia, I do a lot of work in Australia, the Australian Principal Occupational Health and Safety and Wellbeing Survey. So this shows that this is a worldwide problem. This is not just within our state or our nation, but they found that 1 in 3 school principals are in serious distress, and 1 in 3 principals have actually been exposed to physical violence on the part of their students. In the United States, 42% of principals indicated they were considering leaving their position. And then Queen and Schumacher, from about 2010 to 2011, found that as many as 75% of principals experienced the stress-related symptoms. Now, I haven't forgotten about teachers. The American Federation of Teachers found prior to COVID, 78% of teachers reported feeling physically and emotionally exhausted. And then you can see from the UK, same thing. Let me add to the reason why COVID, besides the control piece and the unknown, there was a study in the United States done on teachers in 2018, and 90% of teachers surveyed said in the PricewaterhouseCoopers survey, they said that they did not know how to use technology to offer deeper level learning to students. 10% of teachers felt comfortable in that survey that they can offer deeper level learning experiences to kids using remote. So there's no wonder why this stress has been magnified over the past year. Now there's another piece of research that shows triage, transition, and transform. Many people are in triage where others might be in transition. They're sort of figuring it out and they're balancing between the two. And others are in transformation. They're finding a very creative side. But within one school building, whether we're talking about students or we're talking about teachers, you can have a mixture of triage, transition, and transform. And that makes it very difficult, because if you're a school leader who's talking about using this as a space to transform for next year, and you've got teachers within the school that are in triage mode still, it is creating some more chaos within our schools. And it's something we have to be able to have dialogue about. Now, I did a study of about 1,000 school leaders, and what they said is COVID-related stress, they strongly agree. It was about 72% of them. And then you've got 22, 23% that agree. And then you've got neither agree nor disagree. You've got the disagree piece too. And we know that even some people in our survey here that you just did through Mentimeter said you disagree, that you found an increase in stress. But you've got people that when I asked, I experienced an increase in stress before COVID. We've got about 56% of people that said true. And then we've got about 44% that said false. And my thinking here is that some people thought they were experiencing stress before COVID, and then COVID hit and they realized that they maybe didn't understand what true stress was. So what we know is that stress and anxiety has been increasing over the years, and we know that it's been magnified by COVID. And we know part of the reason why it's magnified is because of our control. And we need to keep that in mind, because when I talk about things like mindfulness and meditation, one of the things that I need to be able to practice, and I do it on a daily basis, 10 minutes, 12 minutes at the most, is when I'm looking at mindfulness, I start thinking about the things that I control and the things that I don't control. And that is a daily practice on all of our parts. Now we know the stressors, ever-changing master schedules, right? The pressure for being the all-knowing. Principals feel like this.
Hi, Charlie, you gotta go outside. Come here. Keep my dog out before you learn.
Principals feel like this for teachers. They feel like they're supposed to be the all-knowing, and we know that teachers feel like this for their students. There are just some questions that they can't answer. And that's part of the ever-changing, the unknowing, the unknown part that came up in that open-ended question as well. But it's about being open and honest and not faking it till you make it, but being open and honest about saying things like, I don't know. Many times principals are actually handed the keys to the building, but they're not necessarily given consistent training. It's one of the reasons why leadership coaching. But we know that parents can definitely be a stressor. I still have lots of people that I'm friends with who were teachers of mine, but also the fact that I'm still actively coaching in buildings. What we know is that we've got parents that are not necessarily paying attention to the rules, and we've got other parents that are uber concerned about their students. And then we've got things like social emotional learning, and we've got transient students, our loss of control, equity, natural disasters. And I know that that is something that you were dealing with in Texas, in El Paso specifically. We've all seen the video that came out a couple of days ago. So we understand the stressors that you're all feeling. And what happens is that those daily changes to our master schedule are not things that we experience typically before COVID, and it can really throw us off now. Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Mark Brackett does a lot of great work, written some great research, has a great book called Permission to Feel, and he was a guest on A Seat at the Table. And one of the things that he looked at when he surveyed over 1,000 school leaders in New York City is that they have the same concerns you do: health concerns of faculty, the stress over work-life balance, and then making sure that they're offering a quality education for all. And in fact, these are some of the quotations that I've actually heard that were written in surveys that I collected from teachers and principals. Being in the middle between parents and teachers, both groups, which are like volcanoes ready to explode from the stress. And then the bottom one, it was surprising and yet not surprising at the same time: death of a spouse, anxiety of colleagues. They did the survey and that's what they wrote. So we know that the stressors are definitely real. What matters is what we start to look at, what we can do with them, because, and thank you for sharing the Center for Emotional Intelligence website, because this is the thing. If you are here with me, what I want you to know is that it is one thing to be present in a webinar for an hour on a Saturday morning. But what's important, even more deeply important, is what you do after you leave here. You should not feel selfish for wanting to take time to practice some self-care, even if it's 10 minutes. You should not feel guilty for taking a break from social media or shutting down the email for a moment so you can enjoy time with your family. Because if you do not do that, then you're not going to be good for other people. And in fact, the science is not favorable to that, because what a Harvard medical study showed is that stress and anxiety that we feel, and it is on overload right now, affects not only the memory, but other parts of brain's functions, and it affects heart health. And I'm going to tell you a very personal story. My brother, a week before Christmas, had a massive heart attack that none of us saw coming, and he had to get quadruple bypass the week before Christmas. Thankfully, he is doing well, but he had to take a very deep look at how much he was working at the local paper mill and how much overtime, and was it worth it? Because that is what happened. That's right, Elizabeth. Stress is the silent killer. We need to be that concerned about the stress and anxiety that we're feeling. Now, what we also know is that when the brain, this is what appears to happen in the brain when it is under continuous stress. It essentially builds up the part of the brain designed to handle threats. And that part of your brain might be completely under attack all the time right now. And it's taking a back seat. What this leads to, what can we do about it? Well, one of the things that I lead to is that of emotional intelligence. We saw the Center for Emotional Intelligence that came up, and this is a quotation from Mark's book, Permission to Feel. 1990, a year after I graduated from high school. So this is very scary that this is how, maybe you might look and say that's not very recent, but to me, I feel like that's recent. I'm looking, and we've got the fact that Solovey and Mayer actually introduced this first formal theory on emotional intelligence. And what we have to develop is our own emotional intelligence where this is concerned, right? The ability to monitor our own and others' feelings and emotions. And that's where I'd like to be able to take you with some of the things about what is it that we can do? Because we need to be able to discriminate among these feelings and emotions, as you can see, to think about the thinking and actions of others. And what research shows you is when you're feeling stressed, it's harder to actually break that down and see what it looks like. Mark actually talked about the fact that there are 5 areas of feelings: emotional state, decision-making, social relations. You can see the other 2, creativity and effectiveness. When he was talking about decision-making, what he said is that when we are feeling stressed and when we are feeling overly anxious, it can negatively impact our decision-making skills. And it means that we might jump into things and make decisions that are very bad decisions that we don't even realize until after we've already made them. So what are some strategies? Because that's what's really important. We understand the stress, we understand the reason behind the stress, we understand things like self-care are important, but what we need to be able to do is start focusing on the strategies. So let's just do this really quickly to engage you. I understand how stress is affecting my body, mind, and relationships. Let's see how many of you we can get in here. Lots of truths. We know that stress and anxiety can impact the way our brain functions. It can impact our hearts. It can impact our decision-making skills. And the biggest thing is that we actually have to be aware of the stress that we are experiencing. Okay, I'll give about 10 more seconds to see if anybody else wants to fill this in before we move on. Okay, so I see 4 of you said false. So we just went through some of that. We went through some of that research. So hopefully what you can do is look at that link that we put up for the Center for Emotional Intelligence to understand some deeper ways that stress is affecting you and your relationships. I am committed to taking actionable steps personally and professionally. Are you willing to commit? Because I'm going to give you some strategies on the next slides. Are you willing to commit to be able to do that? And I mean really commit, not just a Saturday morning because you got the opportunity to have an extra cup of coffee, but are you really willing to commit? So if you're watching this and you're a school leader or you're a teacher, there are things we can do outside of school and there are things that we can do within school. I'll give about 10 more seconds for people to fill this out. Okay. Looks like we are in a good place. Oh, Eduardo, that's a good comment in the chat box. Thank you for putting that. I wish there was an unsure choice. You know what? I have to be honest with you, Eduardo. I did not even think about that when I was putting this particular one together. And yes, Fariba, sometimes you do not realize you are under stress until someone tells you. Absolutely. That is a very, very good thing to be able to say. Thank you for adding that to the chat box. I think we need to be able to identify that in others, and we need to be able to have those kind of relationships where we can talk about this. Crystal, I wish there was a for the first 3 months choice. Okay. Well, let's work on the here and now. All right. So there's going to be a balance here between theory and practice. School leaders who make mental health and well-being a priority will have teachers who make mental health and well-being a priority. All right. If we can make it a priority, then we can get to what Fariba is talking about here with helping people realize when they're feeling stressed. And also we can get to what Eduardo was saying, take those people who are unsure and put them more in a sure category. What this comes down to is we're going to start with something researchy. That's why I put theory and practice. Social cognitive theory. This is a very powerful theory, and it was something that Albert Bandura from the 1970s was talking about, but this is probably one of the best research definitions that I have. And you're right, Eduardo. Bridging theory with practice, a constant challenge for professors. So social cognitive theory is how we learn in a social context. So let's take what Fariba said. I don't know if I'm stressed. Learning in a social context means that you can engage in that dialogue where you can put it more out in the open, and you can start to identify and say, oh, this is affecting how I'm eating. This is affecting how much I'm sleeping. This is impacting whether I decide to go out and get some exercise. Social cognitive theory is about the fact that we need to be able to learn together. And what this leads to is collective leader efficacy. I have a book coming out in the fall that is focused on strengthening school leadership teams. And the heart of that is through what we call collective leader efficacy, where there is a shared conviction that school leadership teams, so school principals, assistant principals, deans, department chairs, teacher leaders, teachers on instructional leadership teams can make a significant contribution in raising student achievement. But here's the thing. People will look at this and say student achievement and think all academics, and that's not true. Because what I want you to take is all that research about how stressed we are and realize that we will never be able to focus directly on achievement if we get waylaid by other stress and anxiety that is taking our eyes off that. So what this means is that when we get together within our school, we need to make mental health and well-being a priority. We need our collective leader efficacy, our shared conviction to focus not just on the academic side of student achievement, but also the social emotional side. I will tell you, I write a blog called Finding Common Ground for Education Week, and I was hired 10 years ago to start writing it. Up until March of this past year, when COVID came as a pandemic, social emotional learning was the topic that I wrote about. Out of all the topics, school leadership, school climate, social emotional learning was the one where I got the most pushback from people. And it wasn't just people outside of school, it was actually people within schools too. There were teachers and principals that said, we don't have time to practice social emotional learning. We have to focus on academics. That changed after March. Suddenly people started to wake up and see that social emotional should be a part of our shared conviction, because we know that stress and anxiety not just negatively impacts leaders and teachers, but it negatively impacts our students as well. So what we need to be able to do in our time together is discuss some of these contributors. And I have 8 contributors that I want you to think about when you come together in a school. If you come together as a school leadership team, if you want to strengthen that school leadership focus, then you need to be able to look at the contributors that you have that go into developing that shared conviction. And number 1 on there is mindset. And I know as soon as I said mindset, you were looking for Carol Dweck's name, and I cited Carol Dweck as well. Carol Dweck was actually a guest on my web show, A Seat at the Table, where we talked about COVID and we talked about the mindset during COVID. And she's also somebody who's reading this book right now. But mindset is what Ryan Smith says from 1992, a predisposition to see the world in a particular way, a filter through which we look at the world. What we need to be able to do is start to actually tweak our filter. And we need to look at what we do, and we need to look at what we need to implement and what we need to de-implement. And one of the things that needs to happen when we're within our school is we need to be able to talk about mindset, because mindset is not just for students. It is actually for all of us. We need to, when our students come to us, when another adult comes to us, one of the reasons why stress can be so negatively impactful, because Mark Brackett said it negatively impacts our decision-making. Part of that decision-making are the words that come out of our mouths. So deficit mindset, we need to shift that around, because even right now, all we are hearing all the time, left and right, every day, news media, everywhere else, is that COVID learning loss. And I've talked to a lot of researchers, and they've said, we wish we could stop talking about COVID learning loss, because kids don't wake up in the morning saying, I have COVID learning loss. They wake up in the morning and say, this is the day. So we need to meet students where they are. And part of that deficit mindset means we need to get away from talking about COVID learning loss and start talking about, okay, how can our students be more successful given the challenges that they have faced? Instead of focusing on change, focus on improvement. We change all the time. And sometimes we're changing in ways that we don't even know. We need to be able to directly start talking about how are we going to focus on improvement, social, emotionally, and academically. Instead of feeling improvement in your gut, collecting evidence to understand the impact that you're having. Instead of seeing debate as a negative interaction, see it as an opportunity for growth. In fact, when I was writing Collaborative Leadership, one of the things researchers said, Kuhn, they said that the reason why collaboration doesn't work any better than if you did it on your own is because we don't challenge each other's thinking. We don't have to be mean when we challenge each other's thinking. We can just ask questions like, I'm having a wondering. Or when you mentioned student engagement, could you paint a picture of what that looks like? You're still challenging, but you're doing it in a way that brings curiosity. Change your mindset. Seeing a colleague as resistant, maybe in fact, they're not resistant at all. Maybe it's self-efficacy, which is confidence they have in their own actions. What we know about the research behind self-efficacy is that self-efficacy is not just the confidence we have in our own actions, it is context specific, meaning some of you are going to feel very comfortable focusing on instructional strategies, but not as comfortable developing relationship with students, and vice versa for some of you. Some of you are very, very good at creating student-teacher relationships, but you're not as good at trying to use different instructional strategies in the classroom. So instead of seeing our colleagues as resistant and vilifying them behind closed doors, maybe what we need to be able to do is see that they have a lack of self-efficacy in that area. Eduardo, as one of my profs would say, we can disagree without being disagreeable. Absolutely, for sure. So what this leads into is number 2 when it comes to the contributors, and that's well-being. Well-being is something that we need to be able to practice. In fact, all of my coaching sessions, when I'm working with individual leaders and leadership teams, or even when I'm running workshops and doing webinars, well-being is a part of the discussion that I have each and every time. If you want to talk about instructional leadership, awesome. Make sure that we're going to be able to talk about well-being as well, because I care as much about your well-being as I do about the practices that you're initiating within a school. So when we're looking at well-being, our school leadership team talks about mental health, and we also talk about practical strategies to deal with mental health and well-being within our schools, with our teachers, with our students. We devise fun ways. I was a school principal, and I didn't have assistant principals, but I had my principal's advisory council, and I had 2 co-chairs that ran the meeting. I was a member of it. And one of the things that happened many years ago is that they came in saying, we feel like we have low morale. And I remember asking, what does that mean? I understand low morale, but in this case, what does low morale mean? Let's talk about it. So at one of the principal's advisory council meetings, we did an activity. When I said, So you say you have low morale, but let's talk about it. What does that actually mean within the school? And what it came out to be was that teachers did not feel like they had a voice in their own learning, because when they went to regional or state networks, they were talked at, not talked with. And I started flipping faculty meetings. I said, let's take our focus. Let's focus on what we want to learn about together. And I'll find an article. I'll find a video. I'll find a blog. And I will send it out to you a couple of days before the meeting so you can digest the information. And then we'll go and do activities at the faculty meeting to engage in deeper learning. If we're going to devote our time to well-being, it doesn't mean at our faculty meetings we say, okay, next thing on the list is well-being. No, it actually means that we engage in flipped leadership, where we can actually send an article out ahead of time and then engage people in a conceptual activity so we can start to unpack what it means and what we can do about it. Well-being is an important contributor. Number 3, professional learning and development. This is not training. Let's not talk about training anymore. Training can sometimes be for dogs. Training is not for people. So let's talk about professional learning and development. What it means is that sometimes people need to learn, and they need to have an understanding about what is stress and anxiety. What does it do to our bodies? How can I actually identify that within myself and with my colleagues? What it means is that when we engage in professional learning and development together, something you can do at every staff meeting, it means that we develop skills to work in a collective. We build confidence together, because professional learning is a lot like student learning. It means we can start talking about instructional strategies and we can start looking for outcomes. Professional development is very different. Professional development is where we start looking at team building and mindfulness. Over a year ago, people laughed when I said team building and developing mindfulness. They said that sounds very touchy-feely to it. Now it's a different story. What we know is that team building and mindfulness is incredibly important during this time, because we've got triage, transition, transform. And in order for people to start getting an understanding of that, that means we have to build our team together. We have to get an understanding of each other. So what does it start with? Things like common language and a common understanding. What I have seen in schools over the years is that we have a common language, student engagement, but we don't have a common understanding of student engagement. To me, student engagement might be compliant engagement, where I want to go into the classroom and see all the kids sitting at their desk. But to Crystal, student engagement might be authentic engagement, where she wants to go into the classroom and she wants to see kids up and moving and engaged in dialogue. Common language and common understanding matters. If we're going to talk about mindfulness, if we're going to talk about well-being, common language, common understanding, and it's something that we can do in professional learning and development sessions, and it means it's something we can do in-house within our faculty meetings as well. Understanding the confidence level of the people around us. I gave you the PricewaterhouseCoopers survey that showed that 90% of teachers didn't feel comfortable using technology to offer deeper level learning to students. It means 10% did. Has that changed over the year? Probably. But what we also need to understand is self-efficacy is real. Not everybody has confidence, and we need to be able to help them gain that confidence. Working conditions, number 4. Do we work somewhere where the working conditions are going to be positive? Some of you wrote uncertainty. Some of you actually wrote that job security is a challenge. It is a question. I feel very badly in that case for you, because working conditions are huge. Do you know, research shows that principals actually have been more likely to leave schools where there was a high number of discipline with students. Instead of looking mindset into proactively looking at how we build relationships with students, many times discipline is about the reactive side, about how we discipline students after they do something wrong. Proactive versus reactive. For me, working conditions are also that fringe benefits, the great part about working in the school that you work in. When I was a school principal for 8 years, I loved the teachers that I worked with and the community that I worked in. Did we always get along? No. Did I sometimes make decisions that made people mad? Absolutely. But one of the things is that we always knew that we were part of an elementary school, And we needed to make sure that we created the best school climate for students. That was difficult when we dealt with millions of dollars of budget cuts, school consolidations, and deaths of students and of staff. But the working conditions actually matter. How do we develop working conditions that are going to help raise people up instead of putting them down? I met people at the doorway every single day. I took kids off the bus. I went into classrooms every single morning to say good morning to the kids. They called it my morning rounds. No matter how low I was, they raised me up. Working conditions matter. So in the chat box, I want to see really quickly, what is the best part of working in the school that you work in? When we're talking about working conditions, what is the best part? What is the best part? Okay, so Erica, you wrote, what is the best part of working at EPCC? Yes. A supportive boss, the student experience, Ruben, thank you. Helping people, Manny. Colleagues and students, Rebecca, thank you. Keep going, come on, I want to see it. What are the positive, when you talk about working conditions, you're like, I'm always going back there because of this. Knowing that I'm valued, Susan, hugely important, and it's actually going to come up in one of the slides. Family-like, I love that. Didn't see whose name it was, but I love that. That's how I felt about the school community I was a part of. Now they're flying through the support we receive from colleagues and students. I love that I can keep learning, Melissa. Yes, because we are a learning institution. So that is really awesome. Awesome colleagues, Diana. That is just enough right there, right? The student, thank you. Successful students. Evelyn, thank you. A shared goal of helping and teaching. Faculty development, Lord, thank you so much for putting those in there. So I'm going to move on. Working conditions. What it means is that we also, when we're thinking about our working conditions, when we're thinking about that shared conviction, when we're thinking about stress and anxiety and what it can do, we need to think about what do we implement and what can we de-implement? What are those things that we need not do anymore? There were so many times during this past year that people said, wow, I had to really hone in on the vital content that my kids needed, the vital standards that my students needed. Why can't we do more of that? Why can't we look at the implementation of what we're doing and try to figure out, maybe we need to de-implement. Doing more does not make us better. I wrote a blog one time called, Are You Activity Rich and Impact Poor? And it was based on a program logic model that I wrote in my instructional leadership book. It's about looking at the activities we do and understanding whether they lead to impact. And if they don't lead to impact, do we need to do them differently or do we need to get rid of them? Implementation versus de-implementation. Yes, Yvette, I like this picture. Thank you. It's new. It's about 24 hours old, actually. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't help people. Instead, you might fall and hurt others. Absolutely. And I looked at a lot of pictures, and this one I felt like was the most important. So Yvette, thank you very much, because that was a risk that I took within the last 24 to 48 hours, knowing that I was going to come to talk to you. What's next? Organizational commitment. This is something that research shows that is really important. So if we're going to come together and we're going to be a team and we're going to work on well-being, if we're truly going to be committed to do something about the stress and anxiety that we feel and that our students feel, then we need to look at our organizational commitment. And that means a couple of different things. Is our organization committed to us as teachers and principals? Are they there to support us? I've worked in a lot of school districts where they're there to churn people out. That's not going to be helpful. That's not going to get rid of the uncertainty. That's not going to help with the anxiety and stress. Is our organization committed to us? Number two, are we committed to the organization? Are we committed to the organization? Are we giving the level of depth, not more work, but are we giving the level of depth that we need to be able to give? And number three, what is our organization committed to? Some of you said what you loved about your job and where you worked was that of learning. That is an organizational commitment. The organization is committed to making sure that students are achieving socially, emotionally, and academically. We're seeing growth in those areas. That's what we have to look at. If we truly want to deal with well-being and mental health, we need to know we are a part of an organization that is committed to us and we're committed to them. And I've been in an organization where that was not true, and it feels very unhealthy. We should want for more. Context beliefs. This is an addition to organizational commitment, but it is simply about the fact that, do we feel like we are working in a school that supports us when we want to be innovative? That means locus of control. Do we have agency? Do we have voice? Because self-efficacy is the confidence we have, but we can only gain that confidence in those challenging areas if we believe context, which is that we work somewhere that's going to allow us to be innovative. Context beliefs are a way that we can develop a shared conviction as a team, and we can start working on social, emotional, and academic. The skills to work in collectives. This is the 7th of 8. The skills to work in collectives are really important, especially during this time, because remember when I said Mark Brackett showed in his research that when we're stressed and anxious, that we don't always make good decisions. Well, the reality is when we are stressed and feeling anxious, we don't have a willingness to listen to others. One of the reasons why I practice meditation every single morning is because it actually bleeds into the rest of my day. Am I going to be able to step back and really hear, really listen? Or am I just going to move forward like a bull in a china shop? Skills to work in collectives. To work collectively in a school, we need to have communication skills. We know that. How we talk to others, how we deliver a message. Equally as important, social sensitivity. And people don't always think of this, especially now when we need to think about mental health and well-being. Think about words like empathy. Social sensitivity means that not only do I care about the message that I'm delivering, I care about how Crystal is receiving the message that I'm delivering. I understand that sometimes I need to differentiate my communication because somebody might be in triage, somebody might be in transition, somebody might be in transformation. You have to have social sensitivity to understand how to engage in dialogue with people who are in one of those 3 areas, because only then will they contribute to the collective responsibility. We want to make sure that when they leave our group, they don't say, oh, we're totally doing this because Peter told us we have to. It means that we are creating the ability to share this, to have collective responsibility where people feel that they have the ability to actually contribute ideas. Last but not least, the confidence to work in collectives. There are 4 experiences that Bandura found that actually help contribute to our confidence and to our shared confidence, to our self-efficacy, to our collective efficacy. Number 1, mastery experience. Believe it or not, as hard as this past year has been, it is a mastery experience because sometimes we find our best leadership or best teaching or most creative ideas when everything seems to be working against us. Number 2, vicarious experiences. As a leadership coach, every session that I work on with the leaders I work with, we do remote walkthroughs. It's non-judgmental. I'm not going in to judge teachers. I'm going in because I want to see what they're doing in the classroom. I want to see what kids are learning. I love watching how they're engaging, and I can learn vicariously through that. Verbal persuasion, that social sensitivity piece that I was talking about before, how we understand how our messages are delivered, but how people are receiving them. It's social persuasion. When we can give positive feedback, it lifts people up. When we give them negative feedback, it holds people down. What we need to be able to look at is something like when to glow on, when to grow on, and when to go on. When to glow on, of course, is the thing they're doing really well. And I know many of you who are secondary are probably saying he's so elementary, but that's okay. When to grow on is that area of critical need that they need to work on. When to go on is something they're doing well, but they could go a little bit deeper. That is verbal persuasion to understand how to deliver feedback in that way, to lift people up, not shut them down. Last but not least, physiological and affective states. What we know is that when people are anxious, it diminishes their confidence. When they're excited, it elevates their confidence. So if we're looking at how to deal with well-being, and many of you are probably thinking I was just going to have the strategies of let's talk about meditation, which is important, but it's not. It's about how do we come together to build that shared conviction together. And it means that we have to look at mindset, look at our words. It means that we have to care about well-being. It means we have to understand the organizational commitment and all of the other things that I just focused on. But other than that, professional suggestions, leadership coaching. It is my job as a leadership coach to make sure that I am focusing on well-being in every meeting, but it also means that I'm also making sure we stay true to whatever our goal is from our cycle of inquiry. It means that you need to be able to establish boundaries. There's a superintendent that I know in Long Island that he had emailed me, I emailed him back, and I got an automated response that said, I check email at 7:30 in the morning, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The rest of the time I spend at home with my family, and I will contact you the next morning. He is setting boundaries. I had a teacher one time, kindergarten teacher, come in to see me, and she said she was tired, and I asked, why? Didn't you sleep well last night? And she said, no, I got a nasty email at 10:30 last night, and I just couldn't sleep. And I said, who was it? Do you mind if I ask you who it's from? And she goes, oh, one of the parents. And I said, I have a question for you. Why were you checking an email at 10:30 at night? I didn't have that expectation. Establish boundaries, even just a little bit. Social media connections can be powerful or they can be negative, depending on what you do while you're there. For me, I don't engage in debates on Twitter because I'd rather be able to do that kind of stuff in person so we can see each other face to face. But social media connections can be very important. I have friends all over the world from where I've done work, and being able to connect with them through social media is really important. Outside of district leadership groups or any group, Facebook pages where you can be outside your district. Research shows that teachers and students are much more likely to be honest on social media than they are to be within their own school. It speaks to why organizational commitment and context beliefs are so important, but also understanding collective leader efficacy, something I just talked about, that shared conviction. I want to show you some slides here. Self-care is important. Strongly agree, somewhat agree. Nobody disagrees with this on the survey that I did. Then I asked, I practice self-care several times a week. Suddenly that changed. Less consistent. Other things got in the way. I know, because if I don't get up and practice meditation within the first half an hour that I'm up, I find it much more difficult to go back and try to practice it because work has already got me on the way, because we know that your office might be next to your bedroom and it's not a classroom or an office at a school far away. We engage in dialogue that focuses on self-care, part of what contributes to collective leader efficacy. We should be talking about this. We should make it a part of our daily conversations. And then, of course, we've got outside suggestions. Time management. The question is just as simple. Do you have to be as connected as you are? Because sometimes it's really important to be connected because we're going through a crisis, but other times we don't. We just pick up our phone because it happens to be an appendage right next to us. Counseling. There's great strength in talking to somebody on the outside. Mindfulness and meditation. I told you, it's more than just 10 minutes. It's kind of like when you start exercising. You don't exercise and then keep eating ice cream and Mickey D's. It means that what you do when you start exercise is you start looking at ways to eat healthier, grapes and fruits and more vegetables. Mindfulness works that way. When you spend 10 minutes focusing on mindfulness through meditation, the rest of your day starts to come into a clearer view. Exercise, something that I didn't get to do today because I chose not to, but it's something that always helps me find balance. And then, of course, social connection. And what I wrote is, just remember, misery loves company. So just be very careful about who you surround yourself with. But these are outside of school connections as well. And I believe that I ended right on time. So questions, if you want to reach out to me, my email address is at the top. And I have a newsletter that comes out bi-weekly. If you sign up, you get some free resources right off the bat. but that is a QR code to the newsletter. I want to thank you for joining me on a Saturday morning. I hope that I offered some suggestions, both school-based and outside of school, because I also hope that you understand that the science and the statistics are showing us that we need to make a change. We need to make an improvement where this is concerned. And I hope that I offered steps to be able to do that. Thank you for what you do and for joining me. And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Dewitt. If we can, if you feel inclined to, please open up your mic and clap, give a round of applause, un aplauso, un grito, lo que quieres, whatever you want. Thank you so much, Dr. Dewitt. Okay, I'll do it myself.
Woo! Woo! Yeah!
Thank you.
Remembering that we can also dance as well.
Oh, I can't, but I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you. We're closing out our session today. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. We know that the Border Learning Conference, your favorite conference that informs leadership on the border, looks a little different this year, but we're so glad you've joined us on this journey. I hope that you will take the lessons that you've learned throughout the conference and share it with everyone in your networks, students, families, and neighbors, remembering that as educators and those who work in education, we may be the authority figures and heroes of our community, especially when we consider that according to the US Census, less than 25% of the El Paso population has an advanced degree and may have limited access to higher education. ¿Todos de acuerdo? Do we all agree? Do we share a mutual understanding? Those of you who joined us on Friday morning, might recall todos de acuerdo, which means, do we all agree? Now, I hate to add to your responsibilities, but I know that all of you joining us today do so out of a deep need to improve the lives of your loved ones, your students, and communities. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you. Dr. Arellano shared the importance of K-12 educators in higher education working together. And from our keynote, we recognize how so many of the strategies that Dr. Dewitt shared apply to K-12 and that apply to K-12 apply to the form and function of higher ed administration, professors, staff, especially as we've pivoted to online learning. Please share these strategies to improve mental health. Dr. Burgos of the Border Health Panel asked of all of us to take the knowledge that you learned during their panel and combat the pandemic of misinformation. Remembering the pandemic of misinformation may even be more deadly than the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, as Dr. Dewitt reminded us, self-care is important. Mental health is important. As fronterizos, we recognize that we've been hurting for a long time, especially in regard to mental health. We've lived through so much together, sister cities, El Paso and Juarez, femicides, mass drug wars, and a racially motivated mass shooting. So please remember how important your mental health is, right? Remembering it's not just selfish, but paramount to achieving our goals, the success of our education systems, and the communities we serve. Many of you reminded us today that as we work to survive, we scramble to get our lessons online. We work on clearing up miscommunications that occur as we try to communicate through screens and keyboards. We do not have a moment to rest and breathe and pay attention to our bodies and minds. So please make this your mission. First, respira, breathe, inhala, exhala, and share the lessons that you have learned with others. ¿Todos de acuerdo? Thanks again for your participation. We have felt your energy and love, and remember that we have lots of love for you that we will share in the Border Calendario. An email will be sent to all registrants with a link to the survey, to the overall evaluation survey. Please be gentle. This is our first time online, hopefully our last. And the link to the Border Calendario and instructions on how to download and to best appreciate the calendario. It's a year-long calendar along with puzzles and recipes for drinks, recipes for food from our hearts and our kitchens and maybe our bars. So an email will be sent to you. Look out for that link. All of the recorded sessions will be available to participants for a limited time. So if you want to revisit the magic that you experienced here, you may do so. Please feel free now to open your mics, give a final shout out to all of our participants, to you, to our presenters, to our keynote speakers. So thank you. Yes, that's the important part. We learned so much. It's time to de-stress, let it out, right? So thank you so much. And we'll close our conference the way it began with the 20th anniversary video, remembering those who began the conference, the founders of our conference, several of which are here today, so thank you to them. Thank you for creating this wonderful conference where we focus on border issues, issues that apply specifically to our students, to those living on the US-Mexico border. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope we can get that video up soon. And if not, maybe we'll dance.
Crystal, thank you so much.
Thank you. And hopefully we'll see everybody again next year in person with abrazos, with hugs, right? Thank you.
Initially started out of a conversation between two friends.
That was the original intent and the methods of the conference. And with the energy and the enthusiasm of coming together and doing something very new.
And the two friends were Peter Mass and Steve Luddington, who was an English professor at Doña Ana Branch Community College. It was the DABCC at that point.
The first conferences themselves and how we met were of a vision of a sort of free market of ideas. Our idea was to create a platform for educators of secondary schools in the region to come together to cross the borders of teaching area.
We came up with the idea that we would launch the conference by having a dinner, like an event, and we actually had Senator Ella Chapley from El Paso as our opening speaker.
It was enormously successful. And I think just talking with individuals locally outside of their regular areas of teaching.
It's about this open marketplace of ideas. We kind of gathered in groups and we put butcher paper up on the wall, and we had maybe room for as many rooms as we had for breakout sessions. And the groups came up with the topics.
And we had individuals come and we had a brunch over which attendees defined topics that they wanted to talk to others about outside of their regular echo chamber, if you will, within the region.
And then the very next day, I think that was on a Friday, and then on the Saturday, we met at the Gadsden branch and we held our first gathering.
That year, it was held at Las Cruces, I remember, and the enjoyment and seeing all the different presenters, made me excited.
We weren't afraid to do something that maybe we failed at. We always did things that we thought might push the envelope a little bit. And if it worked, that was great. And if it didn't, we weren't afraid of change. And I think that was something that's unique about this committee still, really.
To me, it represents the value of the diversity and being about aware of the things that happening in our surrounding, in our borderland.
An autonomy the faculty at El Paso Community College have had in regards to representing their community and delivering educational products to their community.
One of the things that I think was also special about the conference, especially at the very beginning and continuing on to now, actually, is we always had the support of our leaders.
That sense of autonomy is part of, I think, the DNA of the college. I have two very significant memories. One is dealing with the inspirational figure of Jaime Escalante, a math teacher who was filmed for, the story was filmed in the movie Stand and Deliver, and we had him coming out of his home and to deliver a speech and to contact students here in our region after a time where he had basically gone into retirement, into a quiet life.
I just felt like it gave me an opportunity to meet different people, find out about how things worked. I was able to work with administration. I mean, even the president of the college, which I might not have been able to as just a newbie, right? But there I am at his conference table, and we're talking about the Border Learning Conference. And, so I have that special memory.
And another instance where we devoted a large thread to showing the possibilities of that were emerging in the region as a result of aerospace.
It is the excitement that I see and I saw and I'm seeing from watching the participant as they come to see what they can learn and what they can take away from the BLC.
And also just some of the speakers we brought in over time were special to me too. We had a woman named Noah Baum who came from Israel and talked about the borders between Palestine and Israel, and had a great impact on, I think, a lot of us that went to her session. She was a storyteller, and we had I can't think of it, Jerry, and I can't think of his last name. He was a storyteller also, and they had a great impact on me. Jaime Escalante, the man who was the basis for Stand and Deliver, the movie, he was one of our speakers. We brought in students from all over the El Paso region. We met people from NPR, and it just, just that kind of experience was very special to me. And then just being able to work at the college with my colleagues and from DABCC and DACC too. Yeah.